Hello and welcome to the Building Podcast. As we know, construction in the UK is big business, and there's generally plenty to keep us occupied. However, every so often, it's worth taking a view from overseas and to hear some of the views on how we can run our sector and what we might do differently. Today, I'm talking to three people who can bring that international perspective. From Vilnius, we have Richard Evans and Matt Rushmere, and from the UK, we have Blair Whitehurst, all of whom can bring that international perspective on what we do here in the UK. Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to the Building Podcast.
Good morning.
Morning.
So perhaps I can ask you all to give a brief introduction to yourselves and what you're doing and sort of how you can perceive the UK market. Let's start with you, Richard.
Yes, well, I've had over 35 years experience in supply chain management, formerly ran a company, sold it successfully in 2002. I'm now delighted to say that I'm based in Vilnius, which is the capital of Lithuania.
Brilliant. And how about you, Blair?
Hi, I'm Blair Whitehurst. I'm a chartered building surveyor. Again, similar to Richard, 30 odd years experience. A good chunk of that with WS Atkins in sort of building surveying, project management and facilities management, and then did a stint with some of the big FM companies, Sodexo and ISS. So background, some construction and quite a lot of the built environment. And my other half, she's from Estonia, so spend quite a bit of time there as well. So another Baltic states connection.
Yeah, it's great. And how about you, Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Rushmere, also based in Vilnius, Lithuania. I'm working for a company called Nord Logistics as business development manager, and I'm very much focused on trade flows between Lithuania and the UK. In terms of my background, I've spent a lot of time working in logistics and supply chain across Africa. Last year, however, was spent in Estonia, so I've got quite a good grasp of what's going on now in the Baltic region.
Brilliant. I mean, I think the Baltic region is a fascinating region for all of us because of the changes in those supply chains that we've got. So why don't we kick off with one that you should all be able to answer around supply chains and particularly focusing here on the UK and how those supply chains, those international supply chains work. What are the key issues do you think we're facing at the moment in the UK? And let's go in the same roto we've just done the introductions. Why don't you just kick off, Richard?
Yeah. Be delighted. Well, it's a unique perspective from here. Obviously, there's a lot of craftsmanship. The Baltic states are renowned for construction craftsmanship. Obviously, a lot of timber was coming out of Russia and Belarus to the region. Unfortunately, that's stopped now due to the war. So the next question is when will the sanctions be lifted? It could be years. So it's obviously had a dramatic effect on the world and on construction materials that we're used to dealing with every day in the United Kingdom. So the costs have gone up exponentially, which is a real challenge for the all concerned.
So just on that point, before I come to you, Blair and Matt, the increase in costs, and we've seen massive increases in supply chain costs here, particularly for around materials. Is that attributable to the changing supply chains and opening up new routes and the cost of opening up those new routes, or is it just it's more expensive to deal elsewhere in the world?
Just a myriad of things, transport, all sorts of reasons, the cost of materials in general. Blair would probably be better to answer it more in depth.
Go on then, Blair, over to you.
Okay, say picking on timber as an example, so that was one of the biggest exports into the Baltic states from Russia. That cut down overnight, and they've had to look elsewhere, source from within the countries. Baltic states are pretty much 50% forest, so they've got a good supply themselves. They look across the water to Sweden, Finland, and draw materials from there. You've got competition in Germany, tends to be a little bit cheaper there. So, there's been kind of a perfect storm of some areas have had better traditional log rates, timber prices, and they've had to look, to try and get new markets and put added value on the materials rather than just selling the base product. But as Richard touched on, shipping costs, they've gone up with the fuel on the ships. Transport costs have gone up, labour and fuel again. So it's all had a material impact on the final costs.
And so, Matt, what's your perspective? I mean, logistics obviously key to your business.
Absolutely.
What are you seeing around particularly from Eastern Europe coming into the UK?
Yeah, so well, obviously Blair and Richard have given quite a concise answer there on Eastern Europe, but from a more macro perspective, obviously oil is a huge factor within logistics, given that it's the number one input cost for shipping. And at the moment, in terms of a more forward-looking view, given that the situation in the Middle East and that it is in essence a basket case, really there's quite a lot of uncertainty over the oil price, which actually throughout 2024 has remained relatively low at about $70 a barrel. However, looking forward to 2025, should things spiral within the Middle East, the potential implications for oil prices and therefore charter rates for vessels could be quite volatile. Obviously, it's very dependent on what happens with Marco Rubio coming in the US as Secretary of State and how he goes about implementing his policy. But I think people should not sleep on oil prices because they're going to be a significant factor, at least in the first and second quarter of next year.
So we've seen spike in oil prices before. Is the risk that oil prices are going to go up by half as much again, and that'll have an significant impact on transport, or will we get the same number of materials through but at different prices, or will it just reduce the number of materials available in the UK?
That's it's a good follow up. I think it's a combination of things. I think supply side shifts. So as Richard alluded to, the situation with Russia, obviously the conflict with Ukraine, there's a lot of uncertainty as to when that will end, if it will end. If Russia is reintegrated into the global economy, which obviously won't happen overnight, the likelihood is that timber prices and prices for most raw commodities will go down because obviously Russia is an enormous supplier. And so combined with oil prices, there's various potential outcomes, but the way I would think about it would be that Russia-Ukraine is probably going to go on longer than people think, even though they expect Trump to resolve it overnight. It just can't happen that way. And the Middle Eastern instability is likely to keep an upward pressure on oil prices. So I think 2025 UK construction market material prices are likely to be in an inflationary situation.
Mm-hmm. Not good news for any of us then.
Probably not.
Can I ask a sort of broader question then? Is the UK an easy place to export materials from overseas into? Do we have a good logistics hub within the UK to manage these things? I mean, Blair, perhaps you'd like to can you comment on that?
We bring quite a few materials in. Some use trucks, so what you'll often find is, say, Matt's area, Lithuania, doors and windows is an example of one thing that we often trade in. They bring those across, usually in trucks. They'll bring them to a distribution hub somewhere near to London if it's for southeast delivery, offload, and then use more local suppliers that have got the FORS registration for getting into London, etc., to do the final drop-offs. Timber in bulk tends to move on ships. There's quite a number of liner services from Tallinn, most out of Riga actually, in Latvia. That's the biggest port for timber. So they come in around the UK, northern, Drogheda in Ireland, Warren Point, Northern Ireland, Cardiff, Rochester, Shoreham, Inverness. Ports on the east coast, so there's quite a good links there, and long established links. So that element, and then some of the shipping companies will organise the logistics this end, but paperwork's fairly easy. It's one lot of custom clearances per load, so it's not too horrendous. I don't think Matt will probably touch on it more, but overall the paperwork side isn't too horrendous for the bulk materials.
Right. Go on, Matt.
I echo that sentiment. I echo Blair's sentiment, to be honest with you. It really, despite headlines as a result of Brexit making it seem like trade is almost impossible into and out of the UK, it's simply not the case. It's a relatively straightforward process. As Blair mentioned, there's one set of customs clearance per load that's either exported or imported, and this stuff is actually quite straightforward to do as long as you're on top of it and efficient. So it's not really that difficult.
Brilliant, good news. I mean, Richard, you've got experience of imports and exports from all over the world. Is that true for everywhere in the world, or is it particularly true for Eastern Europe?
It's fairly sophisticated here. As we always joke and say, we've even got electric. It's amazing. and it's Lithuania and Estonia prides itself to be a huge tech hub. So it's a good place to be. The speed, the efficiency. It's fairly, as I always say, Germanic and Scandinavian, and obviously their own culture, which is one, particularly Latvia and Lithuania, couple of the oldest languages in the world. Not too sure about Estonian, but it's fairly modern here, I'd say. And so being here is really handy. We're not that far away from the sea. And there's a lot of free economic zones that tie in very nicely, encouraging a lot of international companies to come here and trade. Invest Lithuania, incredibly active, lots of tax breaks, lots of incentives, and we consider ourselves Central Europe, not Eastern Europe.
That's fair enough. For my mistake.
Northern Europe as well.
Northern Europe, yeah. Well, yes, I remember. Yeah, I used to be involved in running a construction company. Used to pick packs of hardwood off the docks at Hull came in from those countries. So I'm aware. I'm glad to hear it's as easy as it's ever been to bring those materials in.
Well, we worked through COVID as well, that's how I got into timber, because I had an inquiry from Saint-Gobain. You may have heard of them, and so we ended up working with a lot of wholesalers. And even directly, so it's they were really fun times, to be honest. It was very interesting. It was 24/7, high octane, and being obviously relatively close to the port, so and spending a lot of time in Latvia as well. So they were really interesting times, massively efficient. So it was really impressive. They pulled out all the stops, and even supplies that were coming from Russia at the time, as the war started. One of our suppliers very gracefully returned the money and sent the ship back, which was really impressive.
Very honourable, isn't it? That's good people to do business with on that basis.
Indeed.
Can I moving on then on supply chain? I mean, we're being pushed into prefabrication and more modern methods of construction, and I'm aware of plenty of prefabricated units coming from Central Europe and the Baltic states. Are you seeing that trade increase significantly coming into the UK? Are those opportunities for bringing those prefabricated toilet pods or timber frame units or whatever it might be into the UK? Is that a growing trade at the moment?
I've met probably 60 offsite manufacturers. The majority of them are in the Baltic states. And so I think the UK has been incredibly slow for various reasons to uptake modern methods of construction. And obviously the logistics and materials has had an impact on that. Blair will have a contribution. We have tendered for many projects. We've done 2 or 3 projects we've delivered in the UK, including Bristol and also Czech Republic. I find it terribly challenging to convince people to it's a risk. As you know, construction is a huge risk assessment, and so it's been very, very slow. I think the percentages are 10% of new build, whereas in America it's 5% and roughly, and in Scandinavia probably 50% of their new builds are using a form of modern methods of construction, which can include modular. So it's very challenging. The factories are incredibly sophisticated, well funded, but like the UK, they have their cash flow issues with pipeline. So bringing pods over particularly, and also 3D volumetric, which is part of or a complete apartment is really challenging logistically wise, and it's expensive, you know, and it's going to take a few more years. And obviously with the changes with government, set on a mission with our dear Angela, absolutely committed to providing more homes. So we're going to have to incorporate international collaboration, which is a hot subject that I've been banging my drum about for many years, to collaborate with these overseas, what I would call MMC giants, really. And we've got a great workforce in the UK, and obviously times have changed, things are changing, AI is changing things. From a perspective of getting young people into construction is a real challenge. Whereas if you adopt modern methods of construction, you're a lot less likely to be outside in the cold and the wet with our fantastic British weather. A lot colder here, though, I can tell you now.
It's been a lot wetter here.
Yeah, so it's you know, it's one of those things where they have got it right here, you know, in the Baltic states and many other countries, and they're adopting that. But you know, the UK has a tremendous opportunity to adopt modern methods of construction with such constraints and such pressure to build 1.5 million homes. So we're setting up a various committee meetings at the House of Lords. We've got our new event coming up soon, AI in Construction, in March. So we're right behind the government. I don't think it's for us to pick holes in what they've said, what they're trying to do. I think the country needs to adopt, adapt, and get behind the government and support them. But we haven't had much consultation, so we're hoping that that'll improve.
Yeah. I mean, the subject of this podcast a number of times is the housing challenge we have. And, you know, I can tell you that in the late 80s, when we last did 300,000 houses a year, there were more apprentice bricklayers than there are total number of apprentices in construction today. So the skills are going to be a major issue, and we're going to have to adopt MMC in some measure. I mean, Blair, can you shed some light on where you think the challenges are in adopting that MMC? It's what are the big issues from bringing these often very high quality bits of equipment from overseas?
You know, as Richard touched on, you know, the volumetric stuff, you're transporting air, it costs you a lot of money. You know, the 2D ones, you know, I think there's real potential for those because they can be packed and transported efficiently. You know, the quality is good. It's in a controlled environment. You know, more and more of the UK top 5 house builders, you know, they've all built their own MMC factories. You know, I've visited one, you know, size of 4 or 5 football pitches. You know, potentially can turn out up to 12,000 units a year when, you know, fully operational. So, you know, the big boys are adopting it, but it's the regional and the smaller size contractors just haven't got the capital to set those facilities up. So, but to be able to compete and build the number of houses that we need, you know, some form of modular will have to be incorporated, let alone the, you know, changes to building regulations. The thermal requirements are pretty much taking us away from traditional cavity construction with block and brick, purely because of the separation of the two skins. So to maintain structural stability, so you're more and more heading towards that inner skin of timber, which then logically says, you know, prefabricate it somewhere. You know, one or two, certainly one of the Finnish long established companies, they're setting up a UK operation. They're going for small regional factories, less cost of to set up, cheaper operation, you know, break even at the mid 30% turnover, where, you know, some of the top hats and people like that need multi-million pound operations, and, you know, so many have failed recently, as Richard said, just because of the lack of cash flow predictability and the amount of money it needs to get them established. So if you can set up at the right scale, you know, you only need to be at 35-40% production capacity to cover your costs. So that's probably way to go. Or you bring it in from abroad, where they've got, you know, 30, 40, 50 years of experience of building.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I was involved in bringing in Swedish timber frame in the 80s for housing, and it was very successful. There was always a challenge there around the standards, and thankfully the Swedish standards for timber frame were well in advance of the UK standards at the time. Are standards an issue? Different standards between the UK and Central Europe, is that an issue, or is that something that we can overlook?
I think, they can certainly work to the, whatever the building regs requirements, architects' drawings, they'll modify to suit. But, generally, most SIPS type panels there's about 8-9 different components, probably a dozen in some, with the, the vapor barriers, the insulation, the inner and outer skins, etc. So, they're quite complex constructions, and more than adequately beat the UK building regs by a long way. When it comes to air tightness of some of these buildings, the 2,000% better than the requirements of the new building regs that came out in April. So, far better. They are net zero when put together, and in some cases, they're actually contributing with the solar on. You're actually, the occupants get free energy and are contributing to the grid and getting an income as well. So they're just so thermally efficient.
I mean, you touched on a subject there which has been key in a great many podcasts we've done, is on the carbon. And I get the impression that the UK is running somewhere behind the rest of Europe in terms of carbon measurement in construction. Have you got any feedback on that?
Not a vast amount, but certainly they, just the general construction standards, the thermal insulation requirements are so much better. The houses, new build properties are so more efficient than anything that we put together. Purely because of the climate, as Richard said, it's a bit chilly out there at the minute. But when I was in Estonia in January, it was -22. So they built to that standard. And then, you get plus 30 in the summer. So you get a huge temperature range. So you need it serves a purpose both parts of the year, to keeping it cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, Matt, are you seeing any requests for carbon in terms of carbon for delivery at all? Are you being asked for those calculations?
That's a great question, and we haven't actually been asked directly. However, more broadly within the shipping industry, there is a regulation called IMO 2030, which is International Maritime Organization, and the crux of that regulation is that vessels per se have to substantially reduce sulfur emissions within the prior to 2030 and post 2030 as well. And so what we're seeing across various vessel fleets is they're being fitted with scrubbers, which are pieces of technology that substantially reduce sulfur emissions, because everyone obviously is so conscious of CO2 emissions at the moment. What I would say, though, quite an interesting stat, whilst people tend to look at shipping as being an enormous emitter and contributor to climate change, while the shipping industry globally emits 5% of humanity's emissions. However, ships carry globally 90% of the value of traded goods. So actually, in terms of a value carried versus carbon emissions situation, it's actually an incredibly efficient and low cost way of transporting goods. So shipping, whilst there is a push to turn it green, it's certainly not going to be going away anytime soon.
I mean, I'm aware of those sulfur regulations, but they generally apply to European transport, not worldwide transport. Is IMO 30 applying worldwide now?
Yeah, that is the global organization. So it's it's a UN sort of equivalent, World Bank equivalent, as applicable to the shipping industry. Obviously, regionally, Europe is probably ahead of the pack in terms of implementing it. However, it's something that needs to happen globally in the coming years and decades.
I mean, I find the whole carbon agenda really fascinating. I think it will change behaviours quite rapidly. And I've interviewed developers who are insisting they get the embodied carbon from their contractors, their designers and their contractors, which will need to include all of the carbon that the shipping and everybody else, transport, logistics, and everything else will contribute. So we're going to cap it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything with modern technology, everything can be tracked now, and the economic value and environmental impact can be quantified. And I think, as you're saying, suppliers and people who are receiving products, they want to know the entire carbon footprint along the supply chain of the product they're purchasing. And I think overall, carbon as a whole will be created as a new sort of taxation on the consumer, regardless of industry.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure.
Yeah.
The other aspect that we've got in certainly in the renewable sector is around modern slavery for imported materials. And clearly the solar sector is buying a lot of Chinese goods where there's clearly a more challenging problem. Is modern slavery something that Central Europe is concerned about, or is able to document and confirm is modern slavery free? I don't know, Richard, are you perhaps the best person to answer that one?
In Central Europe, in Lithuania, I've met literally hundreds of factories, but I wouldn't care to comment on
Fine.
the situation. Okay. But it's it's a sophisticated setup. It's different. Maybe in other Eastern European countries they'll have issues with that. But Blair, what's your viewpoint on that? I'm not an expert.
But similar as Richard. But what you see is that it's very much, let's put it politely, a homegrown workforce. In the vast majority of cases, very little immigration, a little bit more than there was a few years ago. But generally speaking, it's all very local. Not slavery in the true sense. It's quite open. You can go into most factories. The guys will speak with you. Not if there's a hidden workforce there kept under the radar.
Yeah. I mean, it's becoming a bigger issue for certainly the renewable sector, is to be able to identify it. And we've actually got cases of modern slavery happening in the UK where they're installing solar and under conditions which are defined as modern slavery. So it's quite a challenge, and it's quite a challenge to find out how we solve some of those problems in terms of documentation and traceability. But I suspect that's going to affect every supply chain market we touch. Because it's very much a UK challenge that's put down. I'm very aware of time, gentlemen. We haven't even touched on construction. With your international perspective, would you like to sort of say what you think the key differences in the construction market are between where you are in Lithuania or overseas, Estonia in your case, Blair, and what happens here in the UK? Don't know, who wants to kick off on that one? How about you, Richard?
Yeah. Well, they work hard here, and they work hard in England, but it's health and safety sometimes in Lithuania is a bit questionable.
Right.
The things that I've seen, but overall they've got very high standards. So they're very hard-working people, both men and women, that work here that I've come across, that we work with. They're very conscientious workers. Mm-hmm. And they're very keen, but a lot of them return back because of Brexit. So they've got that UK experience now, which is if you think that the Baltic states and other regions have only been independent for the last 32, 33 years. So they're forever changing, and it is a mindset that will change over time. But one thing's for sure, they work incredibly hard, and if you want something doing, it will be done. And they are incredibly efficient. But it's difficult to compare. I don't really like to, compare to the UK workforce, because I know they work incredibly hard as well. But I think they're a lot more here. They've had a tougher upbringing, the majority of them. It's a colder country. Obviously, they're only in the last, I suppose, 15 years, they've become fairly wealthy thanks to the European Union. There's a lot of money floating around. There's a lot of construction. There's a lot of beautiful construction happening here. Mm-hmm. Blair, what's your viewpoint on?
Probably, my view of what I've seen. Yeah, touch on what Richard said. Sometimes health and safety. You can still put your timber scaffolds up there. Comparing to what I used to have to do on construction sites in the UK compared to there, you think same European regulations at the time. They can do that. We've got to do this. But but overall, I'd say speed and quality, not degrading hours, but is better. Things get done quicker. Certainly on the civil side, roads, etc. In Estonia, motorway extensions completed over 16, 18 months. It'd take us 3 years, and they're combating -20 in the winter as well. So I think overall speed of construction is faster, and a lot of the quality is better. I certainly, if I snag one of their big office blocks, I won't pick 10,000 snags as I did on a UK one that I did 30 years ago in the centre of Birmingham, not to name the contractor that's now gone bankrupt a few years ago.
Yeah, okay, well, that's it sounds like we've got some catching up to do. I mean, do you know how everybody's trained in Lithuania and Estonia? Is the training better or more consistent to get that quality? How do you think they achieve higher quality than we do in the UK?
I think it is a training issue. Yes, some of it's done more in controlled environments, in a factory setting, but the actual physical construction on site, I think it's. I don't think they have necessarily as formal apprenticeships, but most education, most kids are in school till 18. The vast majority, even get degree qualified. So you'll probably find there's, guys working on the tools can be degree educated, or higher proportion. So, I think just overall, probably training, education, he's putting it all together and just gets a diligent, hard-working workforce, as Richard touched on earlier, and you put the two, all the bits together, and you end up with something that can work quicker and faster than, sadly, we say we do in the UK.
I think, Mark, in the UK, it's obviously a lot more complex. If you go onto a site, there could be over 20 languages. Yeah. It's mind-blowing and very impressive as well at the same time. A little analogy, if I may. You asked the question, I hate to generalize, but I recently sent some, I was living in the UK for a while to sort out my residence permit here. And I sent back some cases, and I was staying at my father's, and there's a telephone number. It's a regular run from London to Lithuania and the entire Baltic states, in fact, Central and Eastern Europe. And so there's this local chap that you call. He says hello and he says goodbye. So basically he turns up, I say hello, he says hello. And thank you, goodbye. And so that they don't mix their words. They're straight to the point. They just want to know, when you want it built, when do you want it, and will you pay us? Thank you. So a lot less words. The meetings are very short.
So it looks like time and cost are talked about, and quality is taken for granted then.
It is, yes, extremely high quality. The windows that we're doing, we just delivered a project to a client that was working with Turkey before. It's now switched to us for various reasons. The quality is. And I always say that if you want cheap, pay twice, and certainly don't come to us. Yeah. We don't do cheap build. Cheap build is not cheap. And if you want quality, it depends who you're dealing with. You're dealing with an asset holder, or if you're dealing with a developer that really couldn't give two monkeys about thermal values and everything else. But of course they have to. But there are differences. And are we comparing bananas to bananas or apples with apples? And quite often we're not. So we're not comparing like for like at all in any shape or form. The quality here is absolutely outstanding.
So if I was procuring here in the UK, how would I ensure the quality? Because that's something, it's a big risk for me buying something from overseas, because when it comes off at the docks, I've generally got to pay for it, and that's the first time I'm going to get sight or sound of it. How do we ensure quality?
I think most of the factories that we've talked to, they're more than happy to host visits. They're open and happy for people to come and look. We've currently got a couple of customers who are going over to Lithuania in the new year to look at the factories. Gain the view. We've got videos, we've got technology. As Richard touched on, the tech there is very good. You can physically. Yeah. They can walk you around. Is it any different than the old days in the UK when, there were certainly on government contracts coming up to the 31st of March, they got the payments to make before the budget ran out. How many pictures have we signed off of accounts with a picture of today's copy of the Sun in front of a window to prove it was built at the time? So, what can't you do over a video link? It's no different.
And also, if you think, Mark, we're 10 minutes. I mean, for example, here, and Lithuania. We're 10 minutes, a grand total of 10 minutes. It took me 15 the other day. It was through rush hour. It was amazing. And the factories are located very closely to us, certainly within 20 minutes to an hour. The majority of the factories we're working with, and they're very open, and they've been working in England for 30 years. I mean, and there's projects that they can go and see. We delivered a £1.7 million window project for JTRE, which is actually a Slovakian company that built the triptych building in Southwark. So we produced some windows for a building they produced close by for a charity. It was a tremendous project using oak, and everything went to plan beautifully. And that was during during COVID as well, which is really hard because the price of timber doubled for oak at that time. So, as far as that's concerned, the build quality here is outstanding. Construction as a whole is a huge risk. I don't envy anybody that's running a construction company, especially recently. And so, but we're very open and honest, and so our suppliers, and we carry out our due diligence very thoroughly, and down to Blair's 35. I'm not saying he's old, but he's as old as me, 35 years experience in construction facilities management. So the quality is outstanding. It's the relationship that's more of the issue, and building the trust, and of course the payment terms. We haven't had a problem, and we've been very careful of who we work with and who we partner. It's that initial creating the relationship. It's like a marriage, you've got to
that long distance relationship is always a challenge, isn't it? And you need a high degree of trust. I mean, do most of your clients ensure their payments with UK contractors, or is it taken on trust? Are we still on that level?
A bit of both, really. A lot of the entities that we're working with do have a British entity, and they have offices in London. So and again, it's 2 hours and 20-minute flight.
Not too far at all, is it? Not too far at all. And presumably all these things are being delivered probably duty paid, aren't they? So they come off the docks and they can just be picked up and driven off. So that's very, very straightforward. Generally, we've had a good canter through on supply chain and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities working around. I'm going to finish up with asking you each of sort of what you think UK construction ought to be doing differently to take advantage of what happens overseas. I'm going to start with you, Richard, because I know that you've had a bit more time thinking about this, and we'll then go to Blair and finish up with Matt. But so I'd just quite like to understand where using your international viewpoint, where you think we ought to be benefiting. And Matt, I understand you're going to tell us all about logistics rather than construction, but I think it's that, as I said at the beginning, getting that international perspective is actually quite a helpful thing for us to look at every so often.
Yes.
Go on, Richard, let's kick off with you.
Yeah, as I say, I've met a lot of off-site manufacturers, incredibly efficient at what they do, because the reality is actually getting the product shipped and installed at the other end. But from my aspect of working in the Baltic states, is that they are reputable, respected, credible craftsmen that have been building very successfully for many years in their own country, and particularly in Sweden. If you consider a lot of the projects happening are actually coming out of the Baltic states, so they're not building all themselves. The biggest target market for the Baltic states, profitability wise, is countries like Norway, who are willing to pay more. So obviously, Scandinavia's had its issues of late. So, but from my aspect, I think it's about genuine collaboration. It's about encouraging off-site manufacturers in this part of the world to work with the United Kingdom and to genuinely collaborate and to have a bilateral mindset. They're very good at what they do, but without the Brits for the installation and the regulations and everything else, it's a partnership. We're all equal.
Yeah. So the opportunities there on the partnership then, really, isn't it?
It's huge, and there's lots of talented architects and installation partners that we have, and also engineers, etc., that are, you know, are really helpful. I mean, there's so many obstacles or challenges that you could consider, but I see it as opportunities whereby, for example, installation on the site, you know, do they have the turnaround with capability, with entering the site, with bringing huge, particularly 3D volumetric. You're going to ask me soon what's my favourite, aren't you? But the hybrid, it's whatever suits. It depends. You know, if you're building in, we're looking at opportunities in the Caribbean, you wouldn't use Baltic solutions necessarily. Yeah. So there's so many options, and thinking of shipping is crucial. But there is huge opportunity, and I think it's about, as I say, it's about genuine collaboration, working together. We would welcome anybody, particularly government, to come and spend a lot of time here meeting some really interesting people and set up some bilateral trade agreements, and to get Britain building again.
I've heard that phrase somewhere before, that we're certainly going to have to do that if we're going to hit 3 million, that's 1.5 million homes. Blair, what would your perspective be?
Yeah, you know, your point there, you know, the perceived ability to build 1.5 million homes, as you know, 30,000 more operatives needed for every 10,000 homes, or some figure somebody was quoting the other day. You're not going to train them up in time. So the solution is, you know, use your suppliers abroad. You've got an increased workforce overnight. Get your stuff built in factories, and then, you know, 4 or 5 days, semi-skilled guys put your house up when it comes as flat pack. So, you know, that's the fit. You know, that is the only way they're going to achieve it. Yeah, once you got round the planning regs and the planning approvals, even if Miss Rain is going to bounce them all through herself without ignoring the local authorities, it's still going to be all back-ended towards the end of the Parliament. You know, we're not going to build 300,000 next year, or probably 300,000 the year after. It's going to be, you know, 600, 700,000 in the last 2 years, and that's, you know, the workforce just isn't there to do it. So they're going to have to think of alternative ways to get it there, and then use a semi-skilled workforce to put up a proportion of them coming as flat pack.
Okay, so there's the opportunity. Matt, I'm going to finish with you then. That's looking from a logistics perspective. I mean, you've got experience all over the world.
Yes.
Is there anything we ought to be learning we can import from anywhere around the world, or do we focus?
Yeah,
I don't know. Over to you.
Absolutely. I would say for UK construction companies to be flexible in their thinking with regard to their supply chain management policy, and don't be afraid to experiment and try and diversify that. For example, we are involved in trucking from Lithuania to the UK, as well as ocean containers. And at the moment, there is actually quite a spread between the two. It's actually a lot cheaper to use ocean freight, door-to-door delivery to the UK at the moment than it is to go across mainland Europe with trucks. Obviously, that is not constant, and that is continually evolving. However, there is certainly money to be saved if you're strategic with regard to your supply chain policy and you think and act nimbly. And it's just a question of being proactive rather than being set in your ways and stubborn with what you've currently got. So I'd implore people to be strategic and proactive.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
I think
that's just one quick one. Stubbornness there that Matt picked up on. Talking to, I can't name them, but a very large.
No, please don't.
So, you know, several £billion turnover. So it puts them up there. They will only trade between two GB bank accounts in UK pounds. You know, is that stubbornness or what? So, you know, that maybe just gives an insight as maybe where some of the mentality still is.
I think you're probably right, Blair, and I think, you know, Matt, it's been a really good point to finish up with, because I think that flexibility and that changing attitude and the changing approach is going to be absolutely crucial if we're going to accommodate the change that society's pushing on us, as well as the targets that the government's pushing on us. So I think that, you know, we can't keep doing everything as we've done before. And to take your point there, we may have to open up our bank accounts a bit further than just 2 accounts in sterling. Gentlemen, it's been a really interesting and educational conversation this morning. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I wish you every luck, and I'm sure we'll see more of Central and Northern Europe's products gracing our construction sites as we go forward, particularly with the targets that government has set. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mark. Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Mark.